Hey, folks, Eric Stacklebeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. We've been starting every Monday in recent weeks with a live stream, frankly, folks, because there is so much to catch up on after a weekend in this upside down world, and no more so than in the Middle East, where, look, good is called evil, evil is called good, very biblical, and we'll talk about that some more. But it's the world's most volatile and chaotic region. And, folks, a major potential development over the weekend in Israel's war against Hamas terrorists in Gaza. Now, I say potential, and you see the question mark in the title of this live stream. Israel eliminates top Hamas leader Marwan Issa in Gaza strike, question mark. He was certainly targeted Saturday night, no doubt, but was that targeting, that Israeli airstrike, was it successful? That's the big question right now, ladies and gentlemen, that not only Israeli officials are trying to determine, but Hamas as well is trying to determine whether its number 3 leader in Gaza, Marwan Issa, was taken out in an Israeli airstrike on Saturday night, March 9th. Now, Issa was the deputy military commander, number 3 overall in Gaza, but number 2 in the military chain to Mohammed Deif. Deif, number 1 in terms of military operations in Gaza. Issa was his top deputy, but the number 1 overall leader in Gaza, of course, is the notorious Yahya Sinwar. We've talked a bunch about him in recent weeks here on the newscast. He is still alive, most likely hiding in a tunnel somewhere in Khan Yunis, in Rafah, maybe central Gaza, where Marwan Issa was targeted. More on that in a minute. We just don't know. But, folks, I hope to have, hey, perhaps before the end of this live stream, it's around 5 p.m. Eastern time here in the United States, I'd love to have confirmation on whether Marwan Issa was indeed eliminated by the Israel Defense Forces. What would that mean? I mean, look, back in early January, we saw Saleh al-Aruri, an overall leader of Hamas globally, not just in Gaza, where Issa, Sinwar, and Deif are the kingpins, but overall. Al-Aruri was arguably the second most powerful man in the Hamas terrorist movement. He was eliminated in an airstrike in Beirut back in January, as we reported here in the newscast. But in terms of direct involvement in October 7th, Al-Aruri was aware of it, no doubt, but direct involvement. The planning of the October 7th massacre, the deadliest, bloodiest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. 1,200 Israelis massacred, men, women, children, the elderly, Holocaust survivors. Over 240 dragged off into captivity in Gaza. Some 100 at least still remain in captivity in Gaza. I'm talking about those who are actually alive still, the hostages. And you might say, well, I heard that already. I know about October 7th. Well, guess what? Many seem to have forgotten. And we have an entire industry popping up right now that I would classify as October 7th denial. You had Holocaust denial. You have temple denial, those who deny that 2 Jewish temples stood atop the Temple Mount. So I guess it's a natural progression or regression to now have October 7th denial spouted forth by the Israel haters. But nonetheless, you had 3 main architects of the October 7th massacre. Yahya Sinwar, the number 1 overall leader in Gaza, Mohammed Deif, the number 2 overall leader, and Marwan Issa, the number 3 leader. They, folks, were the 3 main architects and driving forces behind October 7th. And now it appears that it is very likely that Marwan Issa is dead and gone. More details on who he is, where things go from here. What happens with the Gaza war now if Issa is indeed gone? What happens with those ongoing hostage negotiations if he is indeed gone? We're going to break that down. And again, more on this. He was called the Shadow by some. He was a very shadowy figure who stayed in the background, who I'm sure over the past decades moved from house to house, tunnel to tunnel, always in an effort to stay one step ahead of the Israel Defense Forces. Look, we've talked about this a bunch on the newscast. The IDF has had great success in targeting Hezbollah commanders, Iranian Revolutionary Guards officials, etc., in Lebanon and in Syria in recent months. Clearly, Israel has superior intelligence assets in the north, in Lebanon and Syria. Gaza, to some degree, has been a tougher nut to crack. Remember, Saleh al-Aruri, who I mentioned a minute ago, certainly a Hamas leader, but folks, he wasn't taken out in Gaza. He was taken out in Lebanon, in Beirut. So another indicator that the IDF has superior intelligence there. Look, the IDF has eliminated many, many Hamas commanders in Gaza. That's without question. That's verified. But that top echelon, the top three terror masters in Gaza, had been still alive and functioning since October 7th until perhaps right now. We want to break that down. Before I do, hey, today, first day of rehearsals for my brand new show, Stacklebeck Tonight. Now, if you are just joining us here in The Watchmen, you don't know much about what we do. Well, we've got The Watchmen here on YouTube. We've got the Stackscast, a brand new podcast that we just launched. You can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you listen. Be sure to check out the Stackscast. And third, the big one, debuting March 25th, just 2 weeks from today, Stacklebeck Tonight, my brand new nightly show on TBN, the world's largest Christian television network. We will air twice per night, folks, 7:30 p.m. Eastern and 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. For such a time as this, we'll be taught everything you love from here on The Watchmen, but more of it every night and a bit broader. The main pillar will be Israel, Middle East, everything going on there, China, Russia, the Great Reset, the rise of AI, the geopolitical scene, but also what's happening here in my neck of the woods in the United States. And at the end of the day, why all of it impacts you, no matter where you live. And the best thing about it is we'll tie it all together from a biblical perspective. And yes, a prophetic perspective. We've got a lot of exciting things planned on this new program. We'll be on the ground back in Israel very soon. We just returned. We're going back. We'll be on the southern border here in the United States, on the ground coverage. We'll have correspondents around the world, London, Africa, Brazil, the Middle East, and beyond. Stacklebeck Tonight, launching March 25th. Mark your calendars, folks. Debut episode, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on TBN. You will not want to miss it. In the meantime, we will continue plugging away here in The Watchmen on YouTube every single day as well. Hey, the three legs, The Watchmen on YouTube, the Stackscast podcast, and Stacklebeck Tonight on TBN. God is expanding our territory for such a time as this, not because of anything great we're doing, but because we are adhering to what he wants us to do, folks. I like to say this is by God and for God, everything we're doing. And there's an old saying, honor God and he will honor you. And we've tried to do that. And we've tried to be ambassadors for Christ and walk blamelessly in his sight. And it seems that we're going to reach now more people with the message in times of what seemed to be universal deceit, where common sense is not so common. We're coming forward with a truthful biblical message on a daily basis. I'm so excited. I can't wait to get going. Rehearsals went great today. We've got more rehearsals over the next few days. It's kind of like I compare, and we get into, let's get back into Marwan Issa, but a closing thought. Any of my fellow former athletes or current athletes out there right now, you know how it is when you're preparing for the big game and there's all this buildup and your coach, you're doing walkthroughs and your coach is taking you through the other team's plays and you're getting ready. It gets to a point where you're saying, man, I just want to play the game. I'm ready. I've rehearsed. I've practiced. I'm ready. That's how I feel right now. March 25th cannot get here fast enough. I'm honored for the platform TBN and God have given me, and I'm ready to roll. But in the meantime, did Marwan Issa, did the IDF roll on him? A little bit more about the targeted potential, not verified yet by Israel or Hamas, but certainly, look, Yoav Gallant, Israel's defense minister, said just today, he talked about successes, recent successes in recent days in Gaza. To me, the biggest event in Gaza over the past few days would certainly be the takeout of Marwan Issa. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a speech. He also appeared on Fox News, and he also, alluded to some very important operations carried out by the IDF. Did that involve the elimination of Marwan Issa? Here's more. From Reuters, Israel was checking on Monday whether Hamas's deputy military leader had been killed in an airstrike in Gaza. I'm just quoting directly from my phone here. as prospects faded of talks securing a ceasefire to coincide with the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Now, Ramadan began last night. We are in the midst of Ramadan, obviously, folks. So talk about a tinderbox. Hey, we were sharing this last week, right? The IDF, Israeli officials, very concerned, of course, about Ramadan. Iran threatening to up its attacks during Ramadan. A lot going on during this month. Sadly, over the years, Hamas again and again and other terror forces have used Ramadan as a time to increase terror. Ismail Haniyeh, one of Hamas's top leaders, saying, let's make it a month of terror, trying to stir things up, not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank, which we call Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland. And the Iranian regime always stirring the pot. So many with very nervous anticipation, would it be maybe a good way to put it? Many have dreaded the beginning of Ramadan this year because of the possibility of Hamas, again, upping the ante, so to speak. And now we have Issa quite possibly taken out on Saturday. So what does Hamas do? Does Hamas, again, use the Temple Mount as a rallying cry like it always seems to do? Al-Aqsa, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which sits atop the Temple Mount today, not far from the Dome of the Rock, which also sits atop the Temple Mount. But a helpful reminder, I mentioned temple denial earlier. The first and second temples, yes, Solomon's temple and the second temple, many called Herod's temple, that's where Jesus taught, chased out the money changers. They once stood atop the Temple Mount. But today, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is there. The Dome of Rock, the Rock is there. And Hamas has used the Al-Aqsa Mosque again and again as a rallying cry. Number one, launching their May 2021 war against Israel over what they said was the defilement, the degradation of the Temple Mount by Israel. And number two, remember, October 7th, that onslaught by Hamas has been called Al-Aqsa Flood. That's what Hamas has called it. Reminder. Okay. Ramadan is here. Marwan Issa may not be here. If his death is confirmed, this report goes on to say, Marwan Issa will be the highest ranking official from the Islamist militant movement. Let's call it an Islamic terrorist movement, an Islamist terrorist movement. More accurate, that's what Hamas is. Vicious, bloodthirsty killers, a demonic death cult. But he would be the highest ranking official. I disagree. That would have been Saleh al-Aruri, as I mentioned earlier. But in Gaza, at least, that would certainly be the man known as the Shadow Man, Marwan Issa. He was known as that for his ability to stay out of sight. The Al-Nusrat camp in central Gaza was bombed Saturday night following intelligence about the location of Marwan Issa. Again, he was second in command of Hamas's military wing, the Izz al-Din al-Qassam brigades. The attack killed 5 people, according to this report out of the region, and Israel and Hamas are fact-checking whether he was eliminated. A Palestinian source said Israel had hit a wing of the camp where it was suspected that Issa had been hiding out. Here's more about Marwan Issa, and we'll talk about the possible reaction/response by Hamas in a minute as well. More on the historical background of the shadow man, Marwan Issa. He was designated, this is from the Jerusalem Post, some very helpful facts here, folks, bear with me. He was designated by the U.S. State Department as a terrorist, I'd agree with that, for his role in Hamas in 2019. That's when he was designated, should have been designated far before that. He was one of the founding members of Hamas in 1987 at the beginning of the first Intifada, so 37 years of terror for Marwan Issa. Israel has said Issa participated in the planning of the October 7th massacre. He had previously been on a target list for Hamas's top leaders that Israel had tried to take out with airstrikes. In 2011, he was reportedly involved in playing a role in the Gilad Shalit hostage prisoner swap. Remember that? Where over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners were released in exchange for IDF soldier Gilad Shalit. Among them was Yahya Sinwar, released in that 2011 prisoner swap. Sinwar and Issa are very tight. They are former cellmates. He was previously detained by the Palestinian Authority for 3 years, from 97 to 2000. He was detained by Israel from 1987 to 93. So a long track record. Little is known about his activities before he joined up with Hamas, helped found it in 1987. But one last nugget here that I think you'll find interesting. He reportedly, his home in Gaza was raided by the IDF in October, and his home contained, quote, a swimming pool, a large yard, and luxurious furniture. Now, folks, listen. You've heard so much about the poverty of the people of Gaza. You've heard so much about humanitarian aid entering Gaza and Hamas taking it, and Hamas taking the billions upon billions of dollars in international aid that's been shipped into Gaza, chiefly from the West, from the US, from Europe, and Hamas taking that money and using it to build hundreds of miles of terror tunnels beneath Gaza to stock up on their rocket arsenals, rocket launchers. The list goes on, the entire terror apparatus. Do you have perhaps a smoking gun there? He was living large, was Marwan Issa, as the people of Gaza starved, that his Hamas movement was reportedly, quote unquote, governing. And while Israel is being blamed for the suffering and the struggles of the people of Gaza, you have, or at least until October 7th, Hamas leaders living the fine life, living the high life with luxurious pools and mansions in Gaza, while the people suffered under the jackboot of these modern day Nazis known as Hamas. There you have it. And by the way, Ismail Haniyeh, Khaled Mashal, Musa Abu Marzouk, these are the more global Hamas leaders. They are reportedly billionaires, ladies and gentlemen. Their net worth in the billions. Where, pray tell, did those billions of dollars come from? Where? They came from the pockets of the American and the European taxpayer, chiefly. All the money going into Gaza. The humanitarian aid that Joe Biden was railing about. Israel needs to let more in. He was railing about it over the past in his State of the Union and once again in an interview yesterday here in the United States. The humanitarian aid that Biden is apparently going to administer from a port in Gaza. That the U.S., did you hear about this? At his State of the Union, he talked about it. The U.S. is going to reportedly build a port or a pier on the Mediterranean coast of the Gaza Strip, which will be manned by 1,000 U.S. troops. And the sole purpose, apparently, of this pier is to administer humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. Now, look, you would think if there's U.S. soldiers there, there would be a far better chance of the aid actually reaching the people rather than Hamas commandeering it. Clearly, it doesn't work when there are, say, UN soldiers in the oversight role. Think of Lebanon. Think of UNIFIL, that arm of the UN that was supposed to push Hezbollah back from the Israel-Lebanon border. Didn't work out too well. That's why we have a great northern war looming. More on that in a minute as well. But on one hand, you say, okay, if you're going to do this, you're going to build a pier on the Gaza coast, there's got to be some oversight as to where the aid is going. So on one hand, you say, well, U.S. soldiers administrating it and looking over, that could be a good thing. On the other hand, two things to keep in mind. Are those U.S. soldiers suddenly a target? I think so, no doubt. Will the Iranian regime just stand pat and let another look? Iran is hell-bent on pushing the U.S. out of the region. Newsflash. That's why we've seen persistent Iranian attacks in Syria and Iraq, where a few thousand troops split between those two countries still remain. So you're putting another 1,000 U.S. troops in, the hottest hot zone, Gaza, in the world right now, really. What does that look like? Do they become a prime target for Iran's ring of fire? Not only Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, Iran itself. There are so many ways that Iran, I'm sad to say, the head of the snake in Tehran, can strike against U.S. assets. And now you're putting another U.S. soldiers into the Middle East. I can tell you, folks, here in the United States, there's not a lot of appetite right now, and that's an understatement, for sending more U.S. soldiers to the Middle East. But that appears to be what the Biden administration is going to do in Gaza, or at least off the coast of Gaza. What do you think? I'd love to get your thoughts on that. We've got thousands of people with us right now, very active chat going on right now. I see scrolling down the side of my laptop here. What do you think? Is this a good idea? The second part is, man, oh man, I've never seen such efforts by the quote unquote international community to help civilians as I do in Gaza. Someone answer me. Why is Gaza such a special case? I'd love to hear your answers and what you think about it. It seems that the world is completely obsessed with the casualty numbers in Gaza, more so than in any conflict I've ever seen, and holding Israel to completely unrealistic expectations that no military, despite Israel's best efforts and incredible efforts, which we've talked about here in the newscast in recent weeks, no military is going to have a 100% perfection accuracy rate when it comes to civilian casualties, especially in a place as densely packed as Gaza, where Hamas is willfully and intentionally en masse using civilians as human shields. The IDF is in a completely, they are winning. Some would say it's a no-win situation, fighting with one arm tied behind their back due to international pressure. But man, civilian casualties are horrific. No one wants to see them. But I can't name a war in world history where there weren't civilian casualties, especially when that side, the government that the civilians reside under, the Hamas government, quote unquote, in Gaza, launched the war. Not one civilian would have been killed in Gaza if Hamas, A, didn't launch the war and massacre 1,200 mostly Israeli civilians on October 7th, but B, if Hamas didn't intentionally put civilians into harm's way as part of its war strategy. Think about that. Is this unprecedented? Certainly in modern warfare. Look, we know all about jihadists in Iraq, Afghanistan, other places, hiding among the civilian population and not caring about civilians being killed, certainly not, and detonating themselves, etc. But in the form of Hamas, I mean, Hamas has intentionally, gleefully put civilians in harm's way again and again and again. We can go on and on. The rocket launchers in hospitals, schools, playgrounds, the tunnels, and terror infrastructure headquarters dug below hospitals. We could go on and on and on. And they do that, folks. They dig and they place these terror infrastructures in civilian areas precisely because they know that Israel will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties and to avoid striking civilian targets, to the point where some believe Israel, and not intentionally, but just because of its very strict rules of engagement, have put Israeli soldiers in jeopardy. Again, not intentionally, but when you have such strict rules of engagement, it's a lot harder to maneuver and do what needs to be done. But that's what Israel has done. And despite it all, I've said it before, I'll say it again here in the newscast, I believe that military strategists, historians, I don't know how much history we have left in this world, but in the meantime, will at the Pentagon, here in the United States, elsewhere, war colleges across the world will study how the IDF conducted this war in Gaza. In about 5 months, Israel has essentially smashed Hamas to a degree that many didn't believe was possible. Rafah is the last stronghold along the Egyptian border, and that's next, and that's coming. Netanyahu reiterated that today. But it's actually astounding. Some 260 or thereabouts Israeli soldiers have been killed in 5 months of intense fighting in the most densely packed, booby-trapped terror stronghold in the world, in Gaza, where nearly every civilian house seemingly houses terror infrastructure, weapons, rocket launchers, etc. And Israel not only has only lost 260 soldiers, but Israel, in a densely packed strip, millions living in the Gaza Strip, Israel has killed according to Hamas estimates, and wrap your head around this, according to Hamas, and we don't take Hamas's numbers seriously, Hamas is saying 30,000 dead. First of all, that number is severely inflated by Hamas, no doubt, to garner international sympathy. And unfortunately, President Biden regurgitated Hamas numbers. When you hear the Gaza Health Ministry, that is Hamas. Hamas is the governing force for now in Gaza. So those are Hamas numbers. Secondly, Netanyahu said today that the IDF estimates that it has killed some 13,000 Hamas terrorists. Say the number is 30,000, and you have 13,000 of those 30 were terrorists. Certainly that changes the equation, right? In terms of casualties in Gaza. Those are 13,000 non-civilian casualties. And if the number is much lower than 30,000, say it's 25,000 people have been killed in Gaza, every death, every civilian death is horrible. But assuming Israel has killed 13,000 Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists in Gaza, and assuming Hamas's number of 30,000 in Gaza killed is inflated, you do the math. And yet we have Biden regurgitating false Hamas numbers, inflated numbers, and not even mentioning 13,000 among that number were Hamas terrorists. Again, this Israeli campaign, now I'm not a military strategist. I've talked to them a bunch, including in the IDF on a frequent basis. And I can tell you, as a student of history and someone who's followed military history throughout my life, and as many of our viewers do as well, my father was in the military. Look, I can't think of a campaign under such conditions that's been waged like this. It's incredible what the IDF has been able to accomplish here. And yet still, we have Israel's supposed allies like the United States castigating Israel and saying, Israel, you have to do even more. And slamming Israel about humanitarian aid. How dare Israel vet every truck that goes into Gaza? Why wouldn't they do that? Couldn't those trucks be seized by Hamas? We've had videos of Hamas seizing UN aid. Isn't Israel smart to know what's going in and out of Gaza and vetting it closely? We could go on, but it can be frustrating and maddening if you stand with Israel like we do here on The Watchman. But that's why we do what we do, right? So we can get the truth out. In times where good is called evil, again, evil is called good. The prophet Isaiah described it very well. And, I think of the book of Amos, my people perish for lack of knowledge. That's why we do what we do. Again, we're trying to bring you the truth and break this down in a way everyone can understand. Very simply. And it's not hard to break down what Joe Biden said over the weekend, by the way, saying that Bibi, Benjamin Netanyahu, is hurting the people of Israel and the nation of Israel more than helping it. He actually said that. Now, a few things. Why is he again meddling in internal Israeli affairs, throwing Bibi under the bus at a time now more than ever? He might not like Bibi. Look, Biden is a leftist, and the longer his career has gone on, the more he's gone full left wing, and that's probably more the people around him in his ear, because I'm not sure he knows really what's going on half the time, but nevertheless, he's gone full far left, clearly. Netanyahu is a man of the right, no doubt. So they might not agree ideologically, and they both say, we've known each other for 40 years. Both have said that. You might disagree with Bibi ideologically, but in this sensitive time, shouldn't you share your grievances behind the scenes directly with Netanyahu? We've had reports of Biden calling Netanyahu profanities, not to Netanyahu's face, but among his advisors, saying he's so frustrated with Netanyahu because Netanyahu just won't do what Biden wants him to do, because what he wants Bibi to do would jeopardize the state of Israel. Biden, is hurting the nation of Israel more than helping the nation of Israel with interviews like he gave yesterday. And people might say, Eric, don't get political. I'm not getting political. I'm calling it like it is. If Joe Biden was a conservative politician or president who was throwing Israel under the bus, I'd call him out in a heartbeat. But he's the man in office right now. And he, to my view, to give an interview like that through not only through Netanyahu, but since Netanyahu, whether you like him or not, if you're Joe Biden, is the leader of Israel, you're by extension throwing Israel under the bus at a time when, as Netanyahu rightly said today, the world, especially Israel and America's enemies, should not see daylight between the two nations. Meaning, you don't want the Iranian regime, Hamas, Hezbollah, Russia, China, thinking, wow, Israel and the United States are having a falling out. They're not getting along. They're at loggerheads. They're butting heads. You don't want to give that impression to your enemies because they'll smell weakness, they'll smell blood in the water, and they'll try to take advantage. This was foolish, this interview that was given. Netanyahu came back today and said, look, he's wrong. And he was firm. And he said the same thing. Look, this shows, or this gives the impression that Israel and the United States are not aligned, that we're not together. And maybe we're not. I'm saying this. Maybe they're not. Maybe the Biden administration and the Netanyahu coalition don't agree on practically anything. That may be so. But that should be kept in-house behind the scenes because of the sensitive nature right now of our shared enemies. Look, the same radical forces that want to destroy Israel want to wipe the United States off the map as well. There's a reason that Israel is called the little Satan and that the United States is called the great Satan by the Iranian regime and its terror allies. Whether the Biden administration likes it or not, the world will group the United States with Israel. They may not like it, but that's how the Iranian regime and others see it, that the United States is the benefactor of the Zionist entity, as they would call it. So I don't know the messaging, or I don't know the intention of the messaging right now. Is it to up the pressure on Bibi? Is it to try and precipitate an unraveling of the Netanyahu coalition? I'm not quite sure, but I have an inkling that may be the case. Folks, make no mistake about it. The Biden administration would love nothing more than for Benjamin Netanyahu to be out of office right now. That's clear. They would like a man of the left in office in Israel who's more pliable and who will do what they want him to do. Fasten your seatbelts, because it's only going to intensify, because Ramadan, look, I pray for the most uneventful Ramadan ever. Again, it just began last night. I pray that Israel finishes the job in Gaza, but mark your calendars. Not only Ramadan here, but Rafah. Eventually, Israel is going into Rafah. The last Hamas bastion, Netanyahu said today that would take 4 to 6 weeks to prevail in Rafah. And secondly, eventually Israel will be going toe-to-toe in a major way with Hezbollah to the north. And then Israel will really see who its friends are. Because the Biden administration, I have a sinking feeling, will gnash its teeth and howl in objection when Israel goes into Rafah and when Israel takes on Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria. But that's for another day, sooner rather than later, I believe, and we will be covering it all the way through here on The Watchman. Hey, quick reminder again, Stacklebeck Tonight, the brand new nightly show launching March 25th on TBN. Mark your calendars every night, Monday through Friday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, twice per night. It will be airing. Exciting times here, Bible times, prophetic times, and we are glad you are here with us shoulder to shoulder for all of it. Hey, until tomorrow, thanks so much for joining us here today on The Watchman. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.